Welcome to Far East Wargaming. I'm Richard, happy to bring you another Heresy Thursday. And this week with me, I've got Jason once again.
Hello, everyone.
So, what we're doing today is we're going to have a look at the most recent announcements from the Nova Open to do with the Horus Heresy. And there's a few.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in here. We've got our rumored new version of Plastic Marines that we already knew a lot about. We've got confirmation about a walker in plastic. We've got everybody's favorite weirdo that leads the Emperor's Children. We've got lots of news, and we've even got some 40K tie-ins that are applicable for Heresy as well.
Yes, lots was announced at the Nova Open, but let's dig into this first. Let's start with the stuff that we all want for every legion in the Horus Heresy, and that's the Deredeo.
Yeah, this is part of this new starter box that they've announced that includes a big chunk of what looks to be 30 Mark III Marines in the new armor, a Land Raider, which is the plastic one we've already had, and then, yes, we've got the plastic Deredeo, and this thing looks great, to be quite honest with you. There is some subtle changes, I think, to the Forgeworld model. You see some trim around the torso of the body near the head. That's new. We see molded logo of the Eye of Horus on the knee. That's obviously new, which also implies that we'll have one for the Imperials as well. And we've got plastic versions of the plasma and the main autocannon batteries and the missile launcher, the Alios missile launcher that goes on top. I think this is great because as somebody that's put together several of the Deredeos in the past from Forgeworld, I'm not a huge fan, mostly because of the way some of the casting and the flash and stuff like that works. This model looks excellent, and I think it's a really, really nice version in plastic that we now have available to us.
Yep, we've been expecting it for a while, and it is nice to see the Dorito in plastic. So, the one thing I'll say is, for some of this molded trim, I do hope it's optional, because I did like the relatively plain look of the older Leviathan in resin. And this here, especially the Eye of Horus, if they don't give us a Legion unspecific kneecap, means we have to shave this off. And that trim around the neck, even though it is nice for certain legions, to me comes off as very chaosy. But then again, everything in plastic means it's going to be a lot easier to work. It's going to be a lot easier to shave if we do need to shave. And I think one of the saving graces, if anybody has built one of the resin Deredeos, is trying to get the cables in all of the guns to line up is the biggest nightmare I've ever had to do in modeling.
Yeah, fair points. I think, honestly, the torso is probably going to be multiple options if we look at the precedent set with the plastic Leviathan and the plastic Contemptor. Same thing with the knee pad being the molded icons. And you're absolutely right. I mean, having put together several of these, where to start with the problems we would have from Forgeworld. For the autocannon battery, the ammo feeds would often have flash in inappropriate areas. The gun barrels were always droopy and required a lot of fiddly heating and bending to get back into place. The Alios missile launcher, the face of the missiles would often have flash and extra chunks of resin built into the front of it, which is really hard to get rid of. So me personally, I'm a big, huge fan of this in plastic now. And yeah, it looks like that they'll solve a lot of the problems. But probably the one thing that I want to point out for the eagle-eyed viewers amongst us, this isn't all of the weapon options that we see. So we don't see any of the Volkite main battery. We don't see the las cannon main battery. We don't see I forget the name of them, the anti-aircraft missiles that go on the top, or the automatic Pavase shield generator option. We don't see those pictured, so this also leads me to believe that we might see two different boxes for this, just like we saw two different boxes for the Leviathan.
Yeah, I think they're going to follow a very similar pricing methodology for how they've done the other walkers, where there's the base kit, and then there'll be one or two upgrade kits depending on how they see the pricing for these, because there are quite a lot of weapon options here. A bit like how the Contemptor itself or the Leviathan had multiple boxes for their weapon options, or a fully different loadout. Because don't forget, everything here is doubled, as opposed to the Contemptor, where we were looking at close combat plus a couple of extra weapons, or rarely where you double things out.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think this is a huge win as far as I'm concerned. Great model in plastic, easy, a little bit of a glow up in terms of some of the options available in trim, decoration, blah, 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 blah. I have no fault for this model whatsoever, and I'm very happy to see this release.
Yep, I'm happy to see it too. Nipple guns are in plastic and they'll be easier to magnetize than the resin counterparts here. Just in general, from a hobbyist point of view, especially for a beginner hobbyist, this is infinitely more user-friendly and will encourage them on the table. They're a very good mold to play with, and there's a lot of demand for them. But one of the biggest turnoffs for new players is that currently it was only in resin, and even if you did get it in resin, you had to be quite a good hobbyist to be able to put this together correctly.
Well, yeah, and I mean the cost added up dramatically because you have to buy the body, the weapons, and the top options separately. So I mean, one of these could easily get very expensive really, really quick. So yeah, you're absolutely right. This is the win for all parties concerned.
Now, something that's a bit more controversial, but I do like it in a sense, is the new Mark III Marines that have been upscaled to the Mark VI size. Now, they aren't identical replicas of the previous Mark III. There are actually some pretty significant changes in terms of the design methodology, where, for instance, the trim is a lot thicker on these guys.
Yeah, so I mean, before I get started with my opinion on this, I mean, first of all, let me just say that Mark III, I think, is the most iconic of the Heresy power armor models, and it's always been my favorite. As a Death Guard player, as an Iron Hands player, and a few other legions, I just love the Mark III. I always have. I'm actually of mixed opinions about this, and let me explain why. So, on the one hand, you have it upsized a little bit. Okay, great. But I mean, having put Mark III's against the new Mark VI's side by side, the difference in the size is honestly imperceptible. Yes, the trim has become more thicker and pronounced, which makes it easier to paint for many of us. I don't like that they de-emphasize the rivets. I think doing that kind of took a lot away from the brutal kind of, clockwork aesthetic that the previous version of the Mark III plastics had. I don't like the spike on the head. I don't understand the spike on the head because, frankly speaking, that doesn't match the aesthetic of many legions. Fits perfectly with the Death Guard. No complaint there. Maybe even fits perfectly with certain legions like Word Bearers or something like this. But in most cases, I don't get the spike on top of the head. So I think for me, I don't hate it. I don't love it. I will probably mix some of these into a force, but I still prefer the old Mark IIIs for all the reasons I just described. Now, I do think that the added benefit of these new ones is obviously the way the arms are posed and the bodies are posed. It fits the upgrade sprues for assault weapons and for heavy weapons that we've seen already. It looks like it fits pretty perfectly. But I also don't like the fact that they duplicated the Mark VI stances with these. Why? If you're going to redo the armor itself, why not redo different stances instead of the exact same stance of the Mark VI? The arms you could have left in a Mark VI style to fit the weapon upgrades, but the poses themselves, I think it's kind of stupid that Mark III and Mark VI now stand exactly the same. That doesn't make any sense to me.
You bring up some very good points. To do with the rivets, making them smaller has de-emphasized them. It's also made it a lot harder to paint them in general. So you've made it easier for the trim to be painted because edge highlighting is difficult for beginners here. But now then you're asking them to take really small rivets and dot some silver or some type of technical paint onto these without making a huge splotchy mess. It was already pretty hard when they were the normal size in the previous one to get these on accurately and just get them painted in general. I think it's become infinitely harder here. So I do... Look, I'm of the same opinion that I like and I dislike this. I think the poses are exactly for the reason you said, that it's just simpler for them to be able to swap the heavy weapons and the assault weapons into them. And we see even in the box that they're releasing here, this battle group, they've given you 10 guys with Volkites, 5 guys with Volkites and 5 guys with Plasma. So I'm guessing they're giving you a full sprue of each there in this box set to do with as you wish. And they fit perfectly there. It's a lazy STL reskin of the Mark VI models. And if I was honest with you, if I was doing a lazy STL reskin, why not reskin something we don't have? The Mark IIs, the Mark V, which would be even better, especially since we're in the Siege of Terror side of things, and this is where they're focusing our time. There was less and less Mark III back then.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right about the reskinning and, saving on the design process. I mean, the de-emphasizing of the rivets to me is basically just saying you don't need to paint them anymore, which is fine. Some people never did, but lunatics like myself like to actually paint the rivets a separate color, like a metallic color, because it actually adds visual interest and pop to the model. So the fact that these are now smaller is not going to be, good for me. But I mean, that's just me. I'll get over it. The helmets too, like they've redesigned the helmet and made it more. I guess the way that I would describe it is cartoony or rounded and less angular and, again, brutal looking like the original Mark IIIs. So even if I do build some of these, I'm most definitely, unless it's obvious difference in size, I'm going to be putting the old helmets on them. I don't like these helmets at all. I think it's a bit of a miss. They should have kept, I think, the aesthetic of the pre-existing fit perfectly fine with this. Again, I don't hate these models. I don't react to them as negatively as I did when the Mark VIs were first released. I just don't think they're great. And I do agree with your point that why not have done 2s or 5s or whatever instead of doing the Mark IIIs when the existing Mark IIIs were perfectly serviceable.
Yeah, I'm looking a bit closer at the heads right now, and they've got this baseball cappy vibe to them at the front with this rather large visor over the eyes there, which definitely was not in the previous edition of the Mark IIIs. So it is very much a different Mark III. But this is what we're stuck with, and look, I can't criticize the model itself in terms of how friendly this is going to be for newcomers. And I think this is one of the things that GW is looking more and more at. They're looking to make these models as beginner friendly as possible, because we've moved out from a Forgeworld, I'll say niche or veteran game system, into what GW is trying to make one of their mainstream game systems, which is going to attract a younger fan base, a younger user base, and even us at Far East Wargaming in our community, we have seen that shift. Not as fast as some other places, I'm sure, but we have seen the appeal of younger players joining this hobby.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes sense. Again, it makes sense. I mean, GW's stated quite publicly in the past through various avenues that their ideal demographic is younger, which is fine. So be it. But I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't play 40K anymore, because of what they did to my beloved Death Guard and this cartoony approach to the design aesthetic. The one thing I would give GW props for with this release is hopefully the backpacks have more of that oval peg style that the Mark VI have, so that you can switch backpacks back and forth as you're trying to make your more battered look and convert and do these different kinds of things. Hopefully the backpack vents, which on the pre-existing Mark IIIs, you have a seam right down the middle, which to me was always a stupid design choice. Hopefully they don't have it on this. So if they can fix those two issues, then I'll give them props for that. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't hate these. I don't love them. I just kind of meh. And I'll probably mix and match and stuff, just kind of like what I've done with everything else. And that's perfectly fine. But yeah, I mean, morning stuff, great.
The question would be, would you feel comfortable putting this in, now they're all the same size, in a mixed Mark VI, Mark III squad?
100%. And I think anybody that complains about this either hasn't tried it or doesn't know the value of the tactical rock. So what I can probably do is I can probably take a photograph, and maybe we can even put it in the visuals for this particular blog when we put it on YouTube. I mix and match in my Death Guard right now. So I just completed a 10-man las cannon squad that I'm going to be using in No Retreat at Gibraltar. And 5 of them are in Mark VI with the shoulder mount las cannons, and 5 of them are in classic Mark III with the old Forgeworld style las cannons. And they look perfectly fine next to each other. Because what I actually did is I took very, very thin piece of cork, and we're not talking about very big. I mean, it's super thin, and I put it under the Mark IIIs just to give them a slight push up in their height. From a height perspective, they're identical. From a stature perspective, because of the way that the guns are carried and everything else, you don't notice. You really don't. So when I first saw the Mark VIs myself, I thought that this was going to be a challenge or an issue. But as I'm starting to mix them into my own forces and doing a little bit of tweaking here and there, whether it's the shoulder pads, the heads, blah, 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 whatever else, honestly, you don't notice. And I think anybody that's whining and complaining about this is it's a bit of sour grapes. It's not that big of a deal. And that's the reason why I don't think these new Mark IIIs either are going to be too much of an issue if you start mixing and matching with your older armor. And, just looking online, I saw somebody make a really great point. Why can't you have old Mark IIIs and new Mark IIIs in the same force and say they're equipping from different Forge Worlds? Different Forge Worlds did have different takes on the exact same design, hence the different bolters and las guns and everything else. So yeah, to me, this is a non-issue, and it looks perfectly fine in mixed units.
Yeah, speaking of the different legions, they did also helpfully, unlike most of the time, show us these Mark IIIs painted in some of the different legions. So the Ultramarines, the Blood Angels, the Iron Warriors, and I think it's Space Wolves in the grey here. And when we were talking about the helmets and how they match some and don't match others, this really highlights it for me as well, because it looks decent on the Iron Warriors, but it kind of does look out of place on the Blood Angel.
I agree with you. Even a lot of Blood Angel players didn't like the Mark III in their forces for whatever reason, because it wasn't fancy enough or whatever else. But I totally agree with you that the spike on the head doesn't really look like it fits this Blood Angel model. Now, if this model was Word Bearers with a different color trim and slightly darker red, I think it would be perfectly fine. But yeah, I don't like it for Blood Angels. It looks fine for Iron Warriors. Looks fine for Space Wolves. I honestly don't see this mark as appropriate, but you do you. I don't see it appropriate for Blood Angels. I don't see it appropriate for Raven Guard. I don't see it appropriate maybe for, I don't know, Emperor's Children. There's probably a few more that I wouldn't use this particular mark in my own personal force. But again, you do you. I totally agree with you that the spike in this example doesn't look right on that Blood Angel.
Now, if we look at the box set that they've released, which they're calling the Legion Astartes Battle Group, we talked about a bit what's in it, but just to go over that again, it looks like there's 30 Mark III Marines, a Land Raider and a Deredeo, plus a assault weapons upgrade, or tactical weapon upgrade sprue in there. And to me, this is great to see as a smaller version of the Age of Darkness box. But the question is how much it's going to cost is going to be the key, because the value of the Age of Darkness box was huge.
Oh, that Age of Darkness box is a massive value. And on the secondhand market right now, it's actually getting cheaper because some people had buyer's remorse or decided to get back into 10th edition or whatever else. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a huge value as well, because there'd be no reason, I think, for them to jack up the price on this. I think it's fantastic the fact that they give you access to the assault weapons. They give you access to the Deredeo and the Land Raider, which are very useful models. It's not like you're getting something like you can buy multiples of this box with no problem. And what I mean by that is if you bought multiples of the starter box for Age of Darkness, not everybody needs a Spartan and multiples of a Spartan. So in some cases, that was a useless model for some players, not for all players. But for every player, you can use everything in this box. Hence, you can buy two of them. And if you buy two of this box, plus some character models, you have a very solid core to your army. You have your infantry, you have tactical weapon support, you have a couple Deredeos, you have a couple transports in the Land Raiders. You've got a very, very viable force here. So I think it's going to be a good deal. I would be shocked if it wasn't a good deal, because, I mean, it just would be different from the pattern. I guess probably the only other complaint I have about this, now that I look at the picture itself again, that I missed when we first talked about the Mark IIIs, is why is the Sergeant again with a power fist and a plasma pistol? I mean, would it kill GW to give us something besides power fists and plasma pistols? I don't know. I mean, the old Mark III box had a thunder hammer. Why can't we get that? Maybe give the new box access to a combat shield or a boarding shield. Yeah, a little bit of a minor quibble there. But as far as the overall box itself, everything in here is useful, and I think it's going to be a great deal.
To be honest, for the Sergeant, I'd settle for getting a bolt pistol with a power fist, because the plasma pistol is a complete waste of points, in my opinion, for a tactical Marine Sergeant, when a bolt pistol would just look better. And especially now, they can actually still have bolters in the latest edition. They couldn't in the past. You're not trading up anything to lose a bolter anymore. So yeah, the plasma pistol is a weird sticking point from GWs for all the Sergeants. I think it's a design choice there sadly not going to move away from, as is quite clear here. But we can deal with it. We have to swap them out.
Well, the Vexilla, the Nuncio Vox, those all look exactly like what we already got before. So I'm sure they just probably changed it to fit the Mark IIIs. Yeah, I agree with you. If there's not extra weapon options on this sprue besides those two items, I'm going to be a bit upset and frustrated because quit doing this, GW. Give us what we can actually take rather than what you want us to take, because there's so many options that Sergeant's going to have in the rules that you alluded to that we don't even get on the sprue itself, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I mean, just like the Deredeo review, I can find no fault with this box set, and I will most definitely be picking up a couple, if not for anything but the Land Raider and the Deredeos themselves, and then I can mix and match the Mark IIIs as I see fit later.
So that was the look at the main line for the Horus Heresy, but they did do something for the characters, and again this has caused a bit of controversy because they've released Fulgrim as his Demon Primarch.
This model looks stunning, to be quite honest with you. It looks fragile as hell if it's coming from Forgeworld, but it looks absolutely stunning, and it seems to be very massive when you actually take the wings into account and everything else. I'm actually blown away by the sculpt. I mean, when you look at the detail of the body, it's stunning, and the quality of the sculpt looks to be really good and on par with kind of the new quality that we've gotten out of Forgeworld versus the old style. But there is a lot of fiddly bits on this thing, and those massive wings are going to be, depending on how they're attached to the body, are going to be a huge challenge to get this guy around. But as far as the quality of the model itself, I mean, I'm absolutely blown away. I mean, where to start? All the jewels on the body. I mean, the segments of the snake torso, the various textures that they've mixed in here. Like one of his arms has got kind of that leather bondage look to it. He's got different styles of horns and decoration coming out of his hair. The spear that he carries, on top of the other weapons that he's carrying, has a lot of detail built into it. This is a beautiful model. I think they really knocked it out of the park with this guy. I can't question the sculpt itself at all. I mean, it's amazing. I just think this is going to be so delicate to put together, to paint, to transport, to game with, in resin. If this is in resin,
it is in resin. Yes.
That to me is the only miss that I could actually say about this entire model is being in resin with all these details. Be prepared for a lot of repairs, or be prepared for not taking him out of the display box very often, because this guy's going to be fiddly.
So for the model himself, I agree with you on all the points. It looks fantastic, and it really does show the capabilities of the Forgeworld and the GW sculptors. Maybe they are still two separate teams. Honestly, I don't know enough about the internals of GW and Forgeworld after they combined. But this is showcasing some of the skills at their finest there. This one here blows, in my opinion, any of the other Primarchs that have been released in plastic or resin out of the water in terms of attention to detail. To me, look, if we don't talk about the greatness of the model itself, for me it comes down to more the fact that, one, it's in resin, which gives you an indication that it's not for 40k, and they are very specific in the article that this isn't for 40k. So then this is the last Primarch, demonic Primarch, for the entire of Warhammer that isn't in plastic now. I don't know what that means in the future, so it does mean that they're not intending to do anything Slanesh based for 40k, which is a bigger issue for 40k players than it is for 30k players. But if it was available for 40k, I'm sure it would have been in plastic, and that would have, one, lowered the price. We've again not been told the price, and it would have made it vastly probably easier to build and maintain than this fiddly resin, because as you said, the scale is going to be gigantic. Those wings are twice the size of the model itself, and we've seen from the previous resin Primarchs with these fiddly bits, Magnus, the Blood Angels there, so we have all of anybody with wings, even the smaller size, they're very delicate to transport. But this here, I don't even know if we have a case capable of holding this in its entirety without being a magnetized metal box.
Yeah, I think the whole point about not having it rules for 40K and stuff like that, it's just my opinion, but I feel it's a bit of a non-issue, and I don't feel that it indicates anything. And the only reason why I say that is um, they did a blow up of the World Eaters for 40K, right? And when they did that blow up, they redesigned the entire range. They released an entire new range of models. We got the new Angron Demon Prince or Demon Primarch in plastic. I don't think this stops that from happening. I think if anything, it probably sends a signal that they have the capability and they can, and they probably will do something for the Emperor's Children in 40K, but it's going to be the exact same business model as they did for the World Eaters. It's all going to be at one time, right? The fact that this model doesn't have rules for 40K, honestly, at this point, doesn't mean anything because Fulgrim doesn't have rules for 40K today, as is before the model ever released. And if the Emperor's Children ever do get their release, ever do get their rules in 40K, there's nothing stopping you from using this model, right? Just like we see people kind of mixing and matching the resin Forgeworld and the plastic 40K Lion today, going back and forth. I think that this is actually a great sign, right? Because there was no reason for them to do this model, if you really think about it. We don't have a Khan on bike. We don't have a Corax, after the massacre, drop site massacre, where his weapon options and everything have changed. There's a lot of things that we don't have that we didn't necessarily need this particular model, but I think it does send a sign that there's probably things coming for the Emperor's Children in the future. So yeah, I mean, I get the take, and I see why a lot of people, are bitching about the fact that it doesn't have 40K rules, but I don't honestly see that as any sort of big deal because again, you don't have the rules today. And it doesn't mean you're not going to get Emperor's Children model in the future for 40K in plastic.
I'm going to disagree with that point a bit because, yes, I agree that, look, it's a great model and it could have the potential to be an indicator that things are coming for the Horus Heresy. But my question is, why did we even need this model? Yes, we're getting into the Siege of Terra where all the Primarchs were demonic. We don't have rules for Fulgrim Ascended just yet. So we have to see what he's like. Fulgrim already unascended is one of the better Primarchs in the Horus Heresy. So when going up against their counterparts here, I think he already has the advantage in there. And as we've seen with all the Ascended rules, they just get even stronger than their non-Ascended counterparts. So we're tipping the Powerous creep in their favor. And also, of all the legions, the Emperor's Children are one of the ones even though I'm an Emperor's Children's player, I don't think needed another model when there are other legions that are clearly lacking, but may not be in the current timeline spotlight that Emperor's Children or everybody who was at the Siege of Terror is in.
Well, I'm actually not disagreeing with you on part of what you said, right? I did also say that I don't think we needed this model before we needed others, like the Khan, like Corax, right? The part that I'm just saying I disagree with is I don't think it's a big deal that it doesn't have 40K rules. And I don't think it's a sign that you're not getting Emperor's Children stuff for 40K. I think it's actually you are a sign you're probably going to get Emperor's Children stuff for 40K based on this model and based on the World Eaters release, etc. So I think we're actually more alike than we are apart on this particular point. But yeah, I also agree that it doesn't make sense in the sense of the release schedule. It does make sense if you actually look at everything that GW's been doing. It all points to the road up to the Siege of Terra. They're connecting the books. They're connecting the model releases that we've seen as part of 2.0. It's obviously very focused on late Heresy era. I don't necessarily agree with that, but to me, if you put all that into context, then yeah, okay, this is probably why they did it.
Yeah, focusing on late Heresy era for me, look, I get if it's following the culmination of the Siege of Terror books, which we've just had from Black Library there, but it's all the Chaos Legions and only a less than handful of the Loyalty Legions who take part in this. So you're leaving a vast chunk of the player base out for what I hope isn't going to be a very long time if they continue to focus on this period for their release schedules.
Yeah, but haven't we been saying that every week, right? Stop feeding us Imperial Fists. Stop feeding us Sons of Horus. Stop feeding us all the things that you're feeding us. I mean, at this point, we're just beating the same dead horse every single week. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying, right? But again, I think that's the very obvious direction they're going with 2.0 in terms of the release schedule and the focus on design and everything else. So, you know, screaming into the dark and shaking our fist is probably not going to solve or change the direction that everything is going. But at least we have an understanding of why they're doing it.
Yep, and that's more to the pity of it in terms of the lack of community understanding from GW, or maybe even the lack of care about what the community desires. But that's a business decision from Games Workshop. I'll say this, and you're right, we've been beating this dead horse, and it really comes down to the same conclusion, that people who are playing this game in 30k, we do love the lore, we love the system that's been built and everything around it, and that's why we're here, and this is why we'll keep buying this stuff. It just hurts as a hobbyist in my soul. I'm not as affected by this as some of the other legions, because I play Emperor's Children, I do play the Dark Angels, and we've had a bit of releases every now and then. If I was one of the unwanted Sun Legions there, I'd feel very bitter week on week from Games Workshop.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's how many years at this point? Poor Raven Guard players, poor many players that aren't getting any releases. Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. I mean, read the room, buddy. As far as the GW marketing for or marketers for 30k, you know, quit giving us the stuff we don't want. But at this point, it's kind of moot. I don't know. Maybe we talk about some other Heresy adjacent releases that we just saw.
Well, yeah, you're right. The thing is, they've announced other things for 40k that do have some ability to be converted or just used straight away in 30k. And one of those is the latest Scout Squad they've released for Warhammer 40k.
These are great looking models. Very, very nice, dynamic style. They're much bigger than what appears to be bigger than the old design, which actually suffered from this very strange no neck aesthetic. If you put together the Scouts from 40k, you understand that they basically have no neck, and it looks like their shoulders are at the same level as their ears. Yeah, these look great. The models look fantastic. And they are going to be usable in 30k because we do have Scout Squad entry as a usable and very useful unit in 30k. And now all of a sudden you've got some models that can be used for it. If you're a purist, you're going to want to shave off the Aquilas unless you're Emperor's Children player. And you're going to want to probably switch the weapons to more 30k appropriate weapons, because the bolter itself, the bolt pistol, those are closer to the 40k aesthetic as well as the 40k marks for those particular weapons. I'm a fluff nut, but I don't remember. I think it's the Godwin pattern bolter is in their hand, and that was all not until like the 40th millennium, if I'm not mistaken. But anyhow, I digress. The models themselves look fantastic, and these are going to be useful for Heresy. Just do the weapon swaps. Some of these heads would look actually excellent on certain legions mixed into your tactical squads. So yeah, I think they really hit it out of the park on these as well. I think probably the only question that I will have is just how big they are, right? Because if you look at the Neophyte models for 40k, which are very similar, obviously, to these, the Black Templar Neophyte models, those are pretty big. And when you put one of those models next to a Primaris Marine, it looks perfectly fine. But when you put one of those models next to a Mini Marine, it looks a bit weird. So I am curious how big these are. They may not look good next to all of the Heresy range, but honestly, I don't get really too bent out of shape about scale. Like, everybody freaks out about scale. I don't really worry about it too much. Great models. I like these a lot.
Yep, I think you're right. I think the one thing that we'll have to do is just shave off the Aquilas. And that's not too hard. This is in plastic. You use a little hobby knife, or spend some time with some sponge sandpaper, or just some general fine grit sandpaper, and you can get a pretty decent go. You have to remember that the Aquila is actually being covered up by the weapons in most of these poses, so you don't have to do a fantastic job, and you can even wear that off as some battle damage as it comes and goes. And I'm less fussed about the guns themselves, because after you've painted them and weathered them, it's going to be harder to see. I would take off the skulls that are on these weapons. Again, just taking off some of the iconography that is there. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to tell much of the difference at the end of the day when it's on the field, unless you're taking this to a purist competition. And even then, I think there's some leeway there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, to each their own. If you don't want us to do weapon swaps or anything else, you can use these perfectly as is, and it's perfectly fine, right? Anybody that won't play you because you're using quote unquote a 40K bolter, I mean, they can go jump in a lake, is my opinion. But again, to each their own. Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, there was also a picture somewhere that maybe showed a couple of them with the sniper rifles.
Yeah, so
Uh,
they have the sniper rifles in this, and the question would be they've got the sniper rifles, the missile launcher, and a heavy bolter, which aren't applicable for the 30k models, but the sniper rifle is. I think the one question is going to be: is there enough sniper rifles for everybody to have one in the squad?
Yeah, good point. I mean, ideally, you would have one for every single one of the models, but actually, a sniper rifle conversion is one of the easiest conversions to do. All you need is a toothpick and a Q-tip, which is how I converted some of mine to make the barrel extender and then the silencer. But yeah, hopefully GW didn't give us only 3 or 4 sniper rifles instead of the full 5, because that would be pretty dumb.
And you're right, it could doing that quick conversion could be a very easy way to mask the 40k pattern of this bolt gun, because we don't actually have 30k specific sniper rifles. There's never been a sculpt for that, other than I think in the actual recon squads at some point there was a very long barreled gun in them.
Yeah, the recon squads have a model. The new Vigilator has a model as well for the sniper bolters. But I mean, you can. There's so many different ways to do it. You can like do the method I mentioned, or I've seen people just put a silencer on the end of an existing bolter. I've seen some people put a scope in a silencer. There's no right or wrong answer. You can do with it what you want. I just hopefully, like I said, GW gives us 5, and nobody has to convert for no purpose.
I think finally we just have a quick look at some of the last announcements. We already saw the Indominus, but it was kind of small, like a bit showcased here in this Nova there, and it's just a bigger version of the old one. We'd already seen it in the releases for 40k in the past, and Indominus is usable in 30k. So, well, what are your thoughts on this? I think we have discussed this in the past.
Yeah, I like the Indominus armor, and I like the new version of it. And you're right, it is bigger. I'm thinking that probably this new release that they're talking about, it's multi-pose, multi-part, versus the more not really, well, it is push fit in the Leviathan box. So you probably have a little bit more customization and posability options. And yes, you can use Indominus armor in 30k. There's rules for it in the legacies, and actually with Pride of the Legion, Rite of War, it's pretty brutal. They can carry thunder hammers, they can get storm shields, they become a scoring unit. So I can definitely see a lot of value in this box for 30k players as well. When I've converted my own Indominus minis, I've shaved off all the Crux Terminatus, a lot of the Purity shields, seals, and these different kinds of things, the Aquila. I've shaved all that off because, again, that's just my preference, but you don't have to. So yeah, these are going to be useful for 30k. And if you actually also see the release pictures, there's a Cyclone missile launcher option. So now all of a sudden, if you can manage to get your hands on a few of these, you can easily convert your own, Iron Warriors, Terminators, Siege Tyrants, or you can convert your full Mentaurus Ultramarines. So yeah, there's value in this box for 30k as well, and I think it's a welcome addition, and the size is pretty nice. But the size is going to look funny against a lot of your existing 30k minis. So be prepared for that. And if it bothers you that much, then this may not be the set for you, and you probably want to get your hands on the old Indominus Termies that were available.
I would say good luck in trying to find the old Indominus. You'd have to go to your friendly local game store and not the official Games Workshop, because I think they've pulled everything off the shelves already there for this. But yeah, I do like the Indominus Terminators. I do have some in the process of being built, but from the older pattern, so they won't have that scale creep in there. And yes, for those legions who did need the missile launchers on their Terminators, you have the ability to do that now without having to buy the Forgeworld ones or mix and match throughout different boxes. I think There used to be one per box. I think in the Dark Angel set they gave you one of these.
Yes, yeah, they did. Dark Angels, I collected a bunch of these. So the Dark Angels and the old Cyclone Plastic Terminator, I had to collect 10 of these to make my own full Mentaurus for my Ultramarines, and trust me, it took me forever and at great expense. But not everybody will use the Cyclone missile launchers now, and since it's a multi-part box, then you can get more easy access to them. And the old Indominus Terminators are actually pretty readily available on the secondary market right now. People are selling them for cheap. So you can always go that route as well if you're worried about your budget. And I think probably the last comments is about the other two characters they've released and previewed in the Indominus armor. So we have a chaplain now in Terminator armor. We have another captain in Terminator armor, not just the one in the Leviathan box. This guy's now multi-posable and with more weapon options. These make a great base for conversions as well. Like I've seen some people that have taken the new Indominus or even the old Indominus armor mixed and matched with some Tartarus and made like a Artificer Tartarus character, right? And played it as a Tartarus character. And you can kind of do that with these models. There's lots of different ways to use them, even though that technically Indominus armor is not an option in the rule book for the Praetors and the consoles. You can easily convert this into some form of Tartarus or even Cataphracta, as I mentioned before, just by using different arms, using different shoulder pads, and doing a little bit of tweaking to the bodies themselves.
Yeah. Playing as long as it's converted to a sufficient extent is something I think most people are okay with. I wouldn't say just taking this model as is and saying he's in Cataphracta armor will suffice, but it's not too hard to do some of those conversions. I think the main ones is especially taking off the Cruxes, which weren't available in 30k, and removing some of the Aquillas that are all over these models, which are very 40k centric iconography.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the vast majority of 30k players that I've run into, if you ignore the extreme voices on the internet, because that's all they are, is extreme voices, I think people just appreciate effort, right? And we've talked about it before. My mantra is show effort, right? I don't care if your minis are unpainted. I don't care if you've mixed in some 40k stuff. Like none of that stuff bothers me if you're trying to show effort. And I'm certainly not going to be a gatekeeper and deny you a game, because I think we should be welcoming in new players. So I'll get off my soapbox on that for just a minute, because that's not the point. But yeah, I agree with you. I think if you just show effort on these minis, nobody's really going to care. And again, the base Indominus squad is a 30k unit choice, so you can take that.
Well, look, that was all of the announcements that we had for Horus Heresy, and a bit of 40k there from the Nova Open. So it was quite a fun-filled Heresy Thursday for us. If you stayed to the end, thank you very much. We will be trying to bring these in on a regular basis on every Thursday, and looking forward to doing that. I think next week we'll be looking at everything they've released up to this date for the Legions Imperialis, because there have been several releases over the last couple weeks helping to preview that, even though it has been delayed till later in this year for its release.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about, I thought today, we went a lot longer than we originally planned. We thought this was going to be a quick discussion, but I thought it was a very good one. We also do want to talk about Imperialis, because if you are a Heresy player and you're not excited about, fielding mass battles in Imperialis, I think, what are you missing? But yeah, I can't wait to talk about that as well. Again, I think this was a good overall impression. I would say this was a good set of reveals from Nova. I'm still not convinced on the Mark IIIs in certain ways, but honestly, I give GW a thumbs up this week. I think it was good stuff.
Well, look, from me, Richard at Far East Wargaming, once again, thanks for tuning in, and please feel free to comment below and like and subscribe to stay tuned for our latest video announcements.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for those that are still listening. Thank you, as always, for liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, all that good stuff. It really helps us. But it's not just about helping us and helping algorithms. It's also, we really enjoy interacting with you. And we try to respond to all the comments. We try to give you fair, honest takes, how we really, really feel. And we also want to do that when we reply to your comments as well. So thanks as always for the support. Keep the support coming. And we will catch you on the next one.